Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Bridgie. Today we are making a Texas style brisket and we're going to discuss common mistakes when making a brisket, so stay tuned. Brisket is one of the most popular cuts of meat that smokers want to master. The most common mistake is not trimming your brisket properly. Too much fat and an uneven thickness of your brisket will pretty much set you up for failure. So first things first, let's trim our brisket. A super cold brisket and a sharp knife will make the trimming process so much easier. This video is going to be a real get to the point video. So let's discuss why too much fat is not necessarily good during your smoking process. Your trim doesn't have to be perfect, but if there's too much fat, your bark will not form properly and the smoke cannot penetrate the meat. Most people tend to not trim their fat because they're losing out on money. Put all your trimmings in a disposable pan and actually smoke it with your brisket, and it will basically render into beef tallow. We are going to do the same thing with the uneven pieces that we're going to trim off the brisket. The more even the brisket, the more even the cook. Think about it like a chicken breast. You split a chicken breast in half because part of the breast is thicker than the end piece. So long story short, the more even the meat is, regardless of what type of meat, the more even the cook. Again, your trim doesn't have to be perfect. The more silver skin that's removed and the fat that won't render, the better the bark will form during your cook. If this is your first brisket, you're just gonna have to realize that you might have to mess it up a couple times until you perfect it. It honestly took me about 2.5 years to really perfect my brisket. But during those years, I learned what to do and what not to do. Now it's time to season. Traditional Texas style is just salt and pepper. As you can see, I'm just adding the salt and pepper with no binder. You don't necessarily need a binder, such as mustard or olive oil, but if it makes you feel better, you can go ahead and add it. I'm choosing not to during this cook. Brisket needs a lot of seasoning, so don't be afraid to heavily season. While our brisket is browning, we can heat up our smoker. Our target starting temperature today is going to be 250 degrees. Today I'm using post oak charcoal briquettes. 2 full-size chimneys usually last me about 90 minutes to 2 hours. Now I'm going to add a little bit of space between the charcoal and the wood log. My logs today are going to be traditional post oak and 1 cherry wood log. This combination is going to help build an amazing color on the brisket. Now we can add our brisket and our trimmings. I'm going to add something a little later, that's why there's some space in between. It's very important to wait till your logs are fully inflamed to make sure we are optimizing a clean fire during this cook. Now this is the hard part for beginners. Allow your brisket to smoke 4 to 5 hours undisturbed. That means do not open the lid and refuel as needed. Pro tip number 1, brisket puddles. Brisket puddles are the death of forming bark. So what you're going to want to do is add a little foil underneath the brisket and basically tilt it so those juices can drip to the side and your bark can form properly. Pro tip number 2 that most smokers don't want you to know. Since the brisket is tilted, the higher part is more likely to overcook. Cover lightly with foil, and this will help protect the meat during the smoking process. It's time to close the lid and continue smoking for another 2 to 2.5 hours, refueling as needed. By this point, you most likely have entered the stall. It's one of the hardest and most annoying part of smoking a brisket. As you can see, our bark is forming perfect, so we're actually going to remove the foil. To help us get through the stall, we're going to slowly increase the temperature. I usually shoot for 275 and I try not to pass 300. Continue to smoke for another 3 hours undisturbed. At this point, we should be past the stall. It's time to check on our brisket. And as you can see, the bark is almost perfect. We have about another 2 hours to go, but now you can start adding your appetizers. Don't worry guys, we're almost there. It's time to close the lid and it should be done soon. I normally pull my briskets off anywhere between 190 to 200 degrees internal. Remember those fat trimmings we trimmed earlier? This is what it looks like once rendered. While your brisket is resting, it's basically going to act like a sponge and absorb all those juices. Make sure you wrap it nice and tight. That's right, we wrap after the brisket is done. Pro tip number 3. You are actually going to wait until your brisket cools down properly. You're actually going to want to wait to slice until you reach an internal temp anywhere between 160 to 140 before slicing. If you slice the brisket when it's too hot, it basically tightens and toughens. Number one reason why your brisket never looks like this. Another common mistake is that people believe if you're slicing your brisket and it's shredding, like this corner piece, it means it's super tender. It actually means that it's overcooked. You can tell it's overcooked because the second you bite into it, you have a dry aftertaste. All because you didn't allow your brisket to rest. Alright guys, so we did it. We made a super juicy and tender brisket with amazing bark. I hope you enjoyed this video. Till next time guys, enjoy.